This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hello, I'm James Robbins. Thank you for downloading the BBC's World Tonight podcast from Friday the 4th of October. Has Boris Johnson waved the white flag, submitting government papers to a Scottish court saying that he will ask for a Brexit extension rather than lead a no-deal Brexit? Or is this just political positioning to end up the winner, whatever happens? We hear from Iraq, where many people are demanding radical political change to end corruption and create clean jobs and an income for the poor and unemployed. And a remarkable scientific breakthrough in research to get people suffering paralysis of all four limbs walking again and able to use their arms. Where could it lead? Plus, a night at the opera with a transgender singer making a debut. Boris Johnson may only have been Prime Minister for 73 days, but he's certainly playing one of the longest political poker games in history, insisting that Britain will leave the European Union at the end of this month, whilst at the same time seeming to flash the odd playing card which hints that he could yet fail to deliver. So what is today's new twist? Well, it's a government paper saying Boris Johnson will send a letter to the EU asking for a Brexit delay if a deal has not been agreed by the 19th of October. The document was submitted to a Scottish court. Downing Street says the government will comply with the Ben Act, which only imposes a very specific narrow duty concerning Parliament's letter requesting a delay. And the source also said the government is not prevented by the Act from doing other things that cause no delay, including other communications, private and public. So what are we to make of all this? Is Boris Johnson preparing for all possible outcomes, hoping somehow to emerge victorious, whatever happens at Halloween? Earlier this evening I talked to Stephen Swinford, Deputy Political Editor of The Times.
Until now, Boris Johnson has maintained that Britain will leave the EU on October the 31st with or without a deal. He said that it's do or die, we're going out, come what may. But today, at the Court of Session in Edinburgh, we heard a very different story. Now, that's very significant because what it means is that government lawyers are conceding in private something that Boris Johnson hasn't gone anywhere near yet publicly.
But is it really a substantial change? Because Downing Street has been briefing, I think, that the government will indeed comply with the Ben Act, the one that Boris Johnson prefers to call the Surrender Act. But on the other hand, the government is not prevented, says Downing Street, by the Act from doing other things that cause no delay, including other communications, private and public. I mean, what does that mean? And does it make a difference?
What it means is that the options are narrowing. So previously, until now, the government has insisted that the Ben Act, as it's called, is weakly drafted. There are flaws in it. There are loopholes that it can exploit to get around it. Now it seems to be conceding that it isn't actually weakly drafted, that they can't get around it. And as a result, they'd have to ask for that extension. Now, if they have to ask for that extension, that means there's really one way that they can therefore stop a Brexit delay, and that is to try to persuade another European member state to veto a Brexit extension. And they can by no means rely on that happening.
Do you think, apart from anything else, the Prime Minister is preparing for the possibility that if he loses, he still somehow remains the victor on the field because he perhaps fails to deliver Brexit on October the 31st, but goes into a subsequent general election as a bit of a martyr, asking people to rally round and support him?
That is exactly what we heard from several very senior members of the cabinet at the Conservative Party conference this week. They were pointing out that Boris has to position himself as the guy that's taking on the establishment. He has to position himself as an insurgent against the establishment in their eyes being Parliament, being judges. Now, that is quite a difficult trick to Boris to pull off because he is every inch, arguably, part of the establishment. The cabinet ministers think that if he can do that, if he can show that he's done everything in his power, he'd even stood in the Supreme Court and said, I don't want to extend, then voters will get that and he will still get a bounce from that.
Tonight, a spokesman for the European Union has said that the government's proposals, the latest proposals from Boris Johnson, do not provide a basis for concluding an agreement. Now, talks are still going on, but it's still looking pretty negative from Mr. Johnson's point of view.
It's looking very negative at the moment. It's looking very negative on several fronts. The EU has significant concerns over the customs arrangements in Northern Ireland. It has significant concerns over the consent mechanism in Northern Ireland. It fears that will give the DUP a veto. There are real concerns in Brussels at the moment. And we're about next week to enter into the kind of end game. It's going to come much sooner than people think. Dom Cummings tonight told government advisors that if the EU says no next week, that's it. We're leaving without a deal. There's no room for further negotiation. He's saying that if they're not going to move on this and they're not going to compromise, we will not repeat the mistakes of Theresa May's government. We are out. So what we are heading for is possibly a very explosive week next week as things finally come to a head here.
Stephen Swinford, Deputy Political Editor of The Times. Well, listening to that was the Conservative MP Daniel Kuczynski, and he joins us now on the line. Daniel Kuczynski, Boris Johnson vowed to die in a ditch to take Britain out of the EU by October the 31st, do or die. But now court papers submitted by the government, as we've been hearing, say that he will ask the EU for an extension if a deal is not reached by the 19th of October. Which version of events should we believe?
Well, I think we should believe what the Prime Minister's personal Twitter account tweeted this afternoon, which is repeating and reiterating that he is pursuing at maximum velocity the opportunity to secure a deal with the European Union, and every attempt is being made to get the European Union to also show the sort of compromise that we have shown in these latest proposals. But ultimately, if that's not possible, we have to leave without a deal.
But surely we have in black and white now, don't we, an undertaking for the first time from the Prime Minister that he accepts something he's never publicly accepted before, that he may have to ask for an extension.
Look, every time the people of any European country have had the temerity to take on the European Union, and we've seen it in Denmark, in France, and in Ireland. Every time the people have spoken against the European Union, they have been bludgeoned into submission. They've been told to vote again until they get the result right. This is playing out yet again here in the United Kingdom, as it did in Denmark, France, and Ireland. And of course, the European Union's ultimate role, in conjunction with certain members of Parliament in this country, is to carry on this war of attrition until we blink first, until we relent to another referendum, and until the result is overturned. Well, they've picked a fight with the wrong people this time. And the United Kingdom is going to pull out on the 31st of October, and that is absolutely unequivocal.
You seem to believe that the Prime Minister could ask for an extension without actually really seeking one, and that he might be relying possibly on another EU member state to veto, to prevent an extension?
Well, there are many different legal and constitutional ways in which the Prime Minister could ensure that we leave on the 31st of October. Of course, if one of our European partners understands the situation and votes to reject Article 50, that is one way of doing it. I have spoken extensively with our counterparts in the Polish government, saying to them that it is not in their interests for a recalcitrant United Kingdom to keep being tethered to the European Union against her wishes, and that ultimately it's in Poland's or Hungary's interest, and many of these other countries in Central and Eastern Europe who depend on us for a strong strategic bilateral partnership through NATO for their defense and for extensive trade, which, by the way, we are their single largest trading partner, both in terms of Poland and Hungary, to get back to allow us to leave and start the negotiations for a strong bilateral partnership.
Daniel Kuczynski, in a word, wherever Boris Johnson leads you, you'll follow, will you?
I will be supporting the Prime Minister because he has shown the guts, the sheer determination and courage to take on these fanatics in the House of Commons who are trying to overturn the wishes of the British people in a national plebiscite. Yes, and he's one of those very rare, once-in-a-generation characters who has got the guts to take them on, yes.
Daniel Kuczynski, thank you. The sounds of protest in the Iraqi capital Baghdad, where more than 40 people are reported dead after days of violent clashes between security forces and anti-government protesters. Iraq's hugely influential senior Shia cleric has urged restraint. Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani sympathised with the demonstrators, who are angry at the lack of jobs, dire public services and rampant corruption. He said the Iraqi government had failed to answer the protesters' demands and must act before it was too late. Earlier, the Prime Minister, Adel Abdel Mahdi, defended his record and talked of a plan to ease the hardship of the poorest families. But he also said there was no magic solution to the country's problems.
I am reaffirming that your voices were heard even before you started protesting. We've reached a clear understanding that your demands of fighting corruption, providing employment opportunities, paying attention to the youth and other reforms are rightful demands. That your concerns that you're expressing are also our primary concerns. We are following and we are responding to all of those demands.
But the Iraqi Prime Minister's conciliatory words may be too little too late for many who feel his first year in government has done little to end corruption or to improve their daily lives. One of those protesting in the streets of Baghdad is 37-year-old Ali Fadhel.
They didn't do their job.
They didn't do their job. Because of that, we must put more pressure on the government. But we're sorry for the people who were killed. They paid an expensive price. But we don't have another way. They are corrupt, their way to lead the country makes us depressed, and we have no hope for a better life. We want to change them. I want to make my country better than now. There's no freedom in Iraq. The violence will end when people find Iraq is a better place to live. To achieve that, we will all go out now.
We all go out now.
Ali Fadhel. Well, for a close-up expert view, I've been talking to Dr. Renard Mansour, Research Fellow at Chatham House.
A lot of Iraqi people are pretty fed up with their government. They're disillusioned. In the last few years, Iraq has celebrated a victory over ISIS, and a lot of Iraqis were hoping that that military victory would lead to reforms and to kind of a move forward. But what they've seen is actually the same old leaders, the same old parties, and the same old political system that since 2003 has been governing, but not really effectively providing services, but also a government that has endemic corruption, where a very small elite benefit, have a lot of power, and that doesn't really come down to the majority. So this kind of tension, this disillusionment has reached a boiling point, and they're going to the streets to express their dissatisfaction.
This boiling point has partly been fuelled, hasn't it, by very high levels of unemployment and corresponding poverty, hasn't it?
Yes, these protests aren't new. We've seen protests year after year. I mean, over the years in Baghdad and other cities in Iraq, you've seen protests. The citizens are poor, as you say. The services aren't sufficient. The government is unable to respond to the needs of the people. It's unable to really represent the people. And so Iraqis are saying, we don't really believe this system represents us. And what we saw last year in the elections was a low voter turnout because they don't think that they can have a voice through elections. The only way that they really feel that they can have a voice is through going to the streets. And these protests are really one of the last options that many Iraqis feel they have.
Now, Iraq's Prime Minister has been sounding at least a little bit conciliatory, addressing the nation on television, apparently accepting that they had some rightful demands, the protesters, appealing for calm. Do Iraqis believe that the Prime Minister is going to respond, is going to make real changes?
So I think it's important to look at these protests as not targeting one individual or one party as such. They're not really only targeting the Prime Minister. The problem they have with the Prime Minister is that he lacks a backbone, and they don't think that the Prime Minister can have a firm stance on fighting corruption or on dealing with both the domestic and foreign influences that affect rebuilding the Iraqi state. So a sort of cosmetic change, even a change in leadership, may be a band-aid, but it certainly won't address the demands that Iraqis have. Iraqis are calling for an end to the post-2003 system and the political parties that they feel have robbed them.
That's, in a sense, a call for revolution, isn't it? For the overthrow of an entire political elite. And it's hard to see that happening.
Yeah, I mean, this is what they're calling for. Under the word muhassasa, which means this quota sharing system where you have so many Shia, so many Kurds, so many Sunnis. I mean, these leaders have for the last 16 years become incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful. And it's not just one leader that's done it. It's a wide array. You know, many Iraqis, what they say is, we used to have one Saddam, now we have 100 Saddams.
Many people trace the origins of today's violence and protest back to what was, frankly, a terribly mismanaged American-led occupation, and think that's where the roots of all this lie. A, is that right? And B, should outside countries, particularly the United States, do much more to try and stimulate positive reform within Iraq?
Fundamentally, what the U.S. did in 2003 was destroy the Iraqi state. And the weakness of that state means, as you say, foreign influences are problematic. The system is corrupt. And Iraq is not a country that needs money. Iraq has a lot of oil wealth. Iraq needs the reform.
A rather brutal question. Should the outside world, beyond obviously natural human compassion, worry about what happens within Iraq, or is it a problem that is entirely contained within the country?
If the Iraqi state doesn't recover, if there's no political solution to address the grievances of Iraqi citizens, it's quite likely that armed groups will come back and make new claims to represent, and it could be ISIS or it could be other groups.
Dr. Mansour, you're just back from Baghdad. You're painting a very bleak picture. Is there any cause for hope?
Life is returning to the cities. You have cafes, you even have bars coming in and restaurants. People are going out. However, without that political solution, we may sort of move back towards conflict.
Dr. Renad Mansour. Now, do you remember 2011 and the first stirrings of the so-called Arab Spring? Back in those heady days, uprisings spread across the Arab world as huge crowds called for democracy and freedom in countries including Egypt, Syria, Libya and Yemen. Well, there's no sign of democracy in any of those, crushed under the weight of autocratic rule and, in some cases, terrible civil war. But there's been more progress in the country where the Arab Spring was born, Tunisia. Tunisia will hold parliamentary elections on Sunday, and a week later, people there will vote in the second round of a presidential contest. And yet all this voting takes place at a time when many Tunisians seem to be fed up with their politicians and, in some cases, even fed up with the democratic process itself, as The World Tonight's Paul Moss now reports.
It felt rather like being at a religious revival meeting. In an upstairs hall in the provincial Tunisian town of Ras Jebel, campaigners for the Heart of Tunisia party were promising something close to heaven on earth if only locals would send votes their way. Heart of Tunisia is a relatively new political party, led by the multi-millionaire owner of a television station, Nabil Karoui. Mr. Karoui is currently being held in jail, accused of tax evasion and money laundering. Yet he has still managed to get through to the final two in Tunisia's presidential election. And his party is top of some polls in the general election, winning over supporters with its claim to be the anti-establishment option.
It's coming like a new way of guiding the country. We feel fed up of the old parties, old ways, and I feel that they can make the country the right way.
Why are you supporting the Heart of Tunisia party?
Oh my God, it's going to create the Tunisia of our dream. The Tunisia that would have no limit in the future.
There is a lot of excitement here. Everyone's wearing these white T-shirts with the red lion on the symbol of the Heart of Tunisia party. I have with me a member of the party's ruling commission, that's Sami Ashour. Sami Ashour, your party leader, Nabil Karoui, he's the owner of a TV station which he uses rather shamelessly to promote himself, to show himself doing great charitable works, and he's currently in prison. It doesn't sound like the making of a great political candidate.
Yeah, but you know, Nabil Karoui is someone who's different than the rest of the candidates. All of these accusations, they're showing up at the last minute, 3 weeks before the election, and he's there to break the old establishment.
There are plenty of prime ministers and presidents who've gained power in different countries in recent years by claiming to be anti-establishment outsiders. But Tunisian democracy is less than a decade old. It might seem just a little premature to be even speaking about a political establishment here. Yet the prominent political parties of the past 8 years are indeed hemorrhaging support. And if you want to understand why people are apparently disillusioned, well, just listen to the man who stopped me in the street just now. He saw my microphone and wanted to let me know that he was happier when the late dictator Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali was in power.
Ben Ali, it's better because help so many poor. And now nobody help the poor because the politician here is stupid.
Does it mean anything, though, that at least you are free now? You can say what you want without being arrested?
Yes, I am free, but in my life I am not free. I don't have money for anything, for pay for milk for baby. Ben Ali is better.
His complaint is far from rare. Wages here are stagnant, unemployment high, perhaps 30% in some areas of Tunisia. And it is politicians who are to blame, according to Wajdi Ben Rejeb, a professor of economics at Carthage University.
The governments that came after the Arab Spring neglected the economy and instead talk about identity, about religion, how we should govern the country following the Islamic or European democratic model. And now, 8 years after the Arab Spring, the economy is growing, but the growth is not enough, especially in terms of employment and joblessness.
And yet you meet plenty of enthusiastic people here trying to encourage Tunisians to keep faith with elections and the democratic process, like the NGO Al Balsala, which means the compass.
Here we are watching the live streaming of a parliamentary commission meeting, and they are examining the state budget.
Nesreen Jalalia was showing me how her team live stream all parliamentary sessions on a Facebook page, and then give anyone the chance to join in an online conversation about what their legislators are up to. Here on the screen, we've got comments going down the side. These are from people who are following what you're doing.
Yes. Here there is someone commenting, nothing is going to change as long as we do not change the economic model. There are also people who pick up on what one of the MPs have said or one of the lobbyists.
We could just pause it for a second. Let me ask you what you're hoping to achieve by doing this.
Is to make sure that everyone knows what the MPs are doing, but also for these politicians who have not been feeling very accountable, to at least know that they are constantly being watched. We will have to make this democracy work. There is no other choice.
Mahsia Labidi seems to be enjoying democracy right now. She's a member of parliament for Ennahda, the Islamist party which has been part of Tunisia's coalition government, and which, like the others, has seen its support plummet. I caught up with her out campaigning on the streets of Gramalia, a rather dusty old town, an hour's drive from the capital, Tunis. You look like you're having fun campaigning. I don't think I've ever seen a candidate spend so much time laughing and smiling.
This is why we speak with people, we laugh, we joke, and even if they are not interested in voting for me and for my list, that's not a problem. The main thing is that they can vote.
Well, you say that, but there's no way around it. There is a lot of disillusionment with democracy in Tunisia at the moment. Turnout at elections has dropped. What's gone wrong?
The fruits of democracy has not been harvested by the people. They are still waiting employment, they are still waiting health care, better education. But I'm sure that if ever given the opportunity to choose between liberty, democracy and despotism, Tunisians will choose again and again democracy and freedom.
Marcia Labidi ending that report from Paul Moss.
This is white smoke rising from above the Sistine Chapel. There is a new pope. There is enormous excitement in St. Peter's Square down beneath us. The Roman Catholic Church has a new pontiff.
The moment 6 years ago which told the world that a new pope had been elected by his fellow cardinals as head of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, tomorrow Pope Francis will change the balance of power in the conclave which will eventually choose his successor. He's done that by elevating 13 archbishops to the rank of cardinal. Crucially, 10 of them are under 80 years old, and so, for now at least, they're eligible to vote. The new cardinals seem to reflect Pope Francis's views on a range of issues, including climate change and moves towards greater inclusion for gay Catholics. So is this a serious blow to conservative elements in the Church? I'm joined by Catherine Pepinster, writer and religious commentator. Catherine Pepinster, is this Pope Francis consolidating his power, trying to secure his eventual legacy?
He seems to be doing so. He will have selected more than half the number of cardinals who will vote for his successor after these new cardinals are installed. And that, I think, is a key moment. But he has been moving in this way for the last few years. Since 2014, he's had a consistory every year, and each year he has chosen men who reflect more of his concerns and his priorities for the Church.
I think I'm right in saying no new cardinals from North America, only one from Italy. So quite a slapdown to those territories.
Well, I think what he's doing is he's looking at where the Catholic Church is increasing in numbers and is increasing in importance for the Church itself. Christianity, Catholicism is in decline in Europe, and he's looking out to other parts of the world where it remains much more of a force. And he's also keen to bring people into the College of Cardinals who represent those further away places, so that their issues, their priorities are discussed, are focused on more, they are in the spotlight. And we're going to see that not only with this consistory, but also with the synod that will start this weekend as well, which will look for 3 weeks at the issues affecting the Amazon basin.
Yes, because, Catherine Pepinster, it seems to be a moral responsibility, a moral priority for this Pope to emphasise the need to limit global warming. Is that right?
I think really since the time he became Pope, that has been a major issue for him, but it particularly became so when he published a document known in the Church as an encyclical, a teaching document that was all about the environment and about climate change. In it, he called the planet our common home, and he is urging the Church and people beyond the Church to focus on the importance of God's creation, our common home.
Now, this Pope has angered a lot of Conservatives, not least over his attitude towards the priesthood and to making it more inclusive and allowing potentially married men into the priesthood.
Well, he's not that revolutionary on married men, because the idea that priests should be celibate and not married is what's called a discipline, and it is possible for it to be put to one side. For example, in this country, we've had Anglican priests who are married who've become Catholic and have also become Catholic priests, and they, of course, remain married. But he's talking about this now with regard to the Amazon, because there's a huge shortage of priests, and there are people who go for many weeks without being able to attend Mass, attend worship, and also receive communion. And for Catholics, that's a really crucial thing. So he's looking at ways in which he can expand the opportunities for people to go to Mass more often. And if that means enabling married men in good standing with the Church to become priests, then he is willing for that to happen. And that is something that upsets the Conservatives.
Catherine Pepinster, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you very much indeed. News that a Frenchman has been able to move all 4 of his paralysed limbs using an exoskeleton suit controlled by his mind, by his brain, has excited scientists around the world. The 30-year-old, known only as Thibault to protect his privacy, was paralysed from the neck down after falling some 50 feet or around 16 metres 4 years ago. He said that using the exoskeleton, even though it still has to be tethered to the ceiling of the lab in Grenoble where the work is being done to keep him safe, using it, he said, made Thibault feel like the first man on the moon. To hear more about this work and other projects in the same field, I've been talking to another pioneer, Miguel Nicolelis, a Brazilian professor of neurobiology at Duke University in North Carolina. He developed a rather different brain-controlled exoskeleton suit for Brazil's World Cup in 2014. It enabled a fan who was paraplegic to stand up from a wheelchair, walk to midfield and take a kick in the opening ceremony.
What happened here is that when the patient imagines, I want to walk, the electrical signals produced by the brain that contains the information about moving can be recorded with electrodes. That's what they did. From these signals, you can use mathematical models to extract the desire to move embedded in these raw electrical signals. And it's these motor commands that are used to control the robotic exoskeleton.
Tell me, how much should your research and should the research in Grenoble give hope to those who are unable to walk or to use their arms? In fact, of course, to people particularly who are quadriplegic and have the use of none of their four limbs. Should they derive hope from this?
Oh, absolutely. We have been working with patients since 2013 with brain control exoskeleton. We have been limited to lower limbs, but after 3 years with these patients practicing 2 or 3 times a week, we have shown that they have recovered neurological functions that they lost due to the spinal cord. Some of them can move now without the exoskeleton. They don't need to use the exoskeleton anymore. So there's a tremendous potential, and there's a major difference between our two groups. They opted to do implants in the brain, and we opted to use a non-invasive technique to read these electrical signals from the brain of our patients. We don't do neurosurgeries, record electrical signals from the surface of the scalp without any surgical procedure, and we show that for walking, that is fine. The patients learn to control a robotic exoskeleton without the need of a surgery. I guess in the case of quadriplegic patients, the surgeons in Grenoble decided that to be able to move the arms in addition to the legs, they would need these implants.
So where could this lead? What's the next obvious step?
Now we have confirmation from the Grenoble group that this is viable, is basically to develop technologies that are affordable, safe, and that allow patients to take these out of the laboratories and have these available to them in their daily lives.
How long, in your view, before this could be really quite widely available? Perhaps I have to say in the rich world, because it's clearly going to be much more difficult to find in other parts of the world. But how long before this could be quite widely available?
You would be surprised. I cannot give you details, but we have things coming very soon that may surprise you guys.
Is there a danger, though, of raising false hope among people who desperately want to be able to walk and use their arms again?
What about the opposite aspect of it? Is it a danger of having people live without hope at all? Our studies show that you can actually get the patients to recover functions that they have lost due to the spinal cord injury. So they are recovering natural voluntary movements of their legs, tactile sensation below the level of the lesion, and also autonomic functions like bladder control, intestine control, and sexual function. So I think we have crossed that threshold of just being a promise.
That's a very exciting achievement, isn't it?
This is the dream of a lifetime. I work with brain plasticity for 35 years, and in the last 2 years, I have seen the fulfillment of this theory. There was just a theory when I was a graduate student, and now is becoming reality. The brain is much more plastic than we think. The whole focus here is not necessarily only on the technology, is the fact that the technology can help the patient retrain his or her own brain to restore, partially at least, neurological functions that were lost due to the spinal cord injury. And if it's true for spinal cord injury, it will be true for other major brain disorders.
Professor Miguel Nicolelis. Now to news of A Night at the Opera with a Difference. Final preparations are underway for the English National Opera's first performance to include a transgender singer. Lucia Lucas will take to the stage tomorrow night at the London Coliseum for the opening of the company's production of Offenbach's Orpheus in the Underworld. Our arts correspondent David Silito takes up the story of a performer who feared never singing on stage again.
Lucia Lucas. On stage with that powerful baritone voice, she plays a man, but off stage, she made a decision to reveal her true self, a decision that she thought would bring the music to an end.
In my entire life, it was like when I was going to college, I thought about this. When I was going to go to grad school, I thought about this. When I got married, I thought about this. Any sort of like landmark time where it was like, this is clearly a change in the trajectory of my life, this was always in the back of my mind. And so I think I thought that maybe I could have a big career, just go hard, go fast, and then have a private life afterwards. And then I thought, you know what, I can be a poor artist if I am honest with myself and honest with my identity. And so that's what I did. And I said, okay, maybe the career's over now. Nobody's been out. There are some trans people who have had professional careers in opera and then retired and then transitioned. But nobody who's done it concurrently. I love doing it. I absolutely love doing it. But I never envisioned that I could do both at the same time.
You thought it would be the end of your career?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Gentlemen, this is your call time call. You have 15 minutes, 2 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your call time call. You have 15 minutes.
Right, there you go.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
5 years on, Lucia Lucas will tomorrow appear in Orpheus in the Underworld at the English National Opera. She plays Public Opinion, a character who bullies Orpheus into doing the right thing in Offenbach's comic opera. Her casting is a first for the company.
I know how people are or how people were, and I'm trying to actively change that. I'm trying to make it easier for somebody to talk with a trans person. And, you know, if I get some silly questions or whatever, it's easier for me to field those questions than for somebody who's, 16 or 17, just came out. They don't even know what they want to do when they go to college or afterwards or whatever. It's a lot easier for me to be a lightning rod in that sort of way.
On stage, you play male roles. Is that uncomfortable?
No, not really. It actually, in a certain way, justifies the difficulty that I had as a child, because I knew that I was not team boy. I didn't identify with them. I wasn't like them.
You've always been acting.
Because I've always been acting, but now I just do it on stage.
If it had been a choice of singing or being yourself?
Be myself, 100%. Easy. I made that choice.
Rather than ending her career, it's blossomed. Transition and hormones haven't affected that extraordinary voice, and this debut on the London Opera stage, another barrier broken.
David Silito at the Opera. Just time for our closing headline. Government documents submitted to the Court of Session in Edinburgh acknowledge for the first time that the Prime Minister will ask for another Brexit extension if no withdrawal agreement is reached within the next 2 weeks. Downing Street, however, still insists there can be no further postponement. And that's The World Tonight. This is James Robbins. From now, from me and for everyone on the programme, good night.